I returned home to find my life on the sidewalk, with a note from my son confirming I was evicted from the house I poured my heart into. My daughter-in-law's cruel words echoed, "You've had your time here." But as I picked up my single suitcase, I knew exactly who to call. And that call would make sure they understood who truly owned that house. Before we jump back in, don't forget to subscribe while you're listening. And let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, take a breath and listen closely. This is my story. The silence screamed before the sight. My old sedan's engine sighed, pulling up to the curb, but I heard nothing over the frantic beat of my own heart. Then I saw them. My rose bushes, the ones I'd nurtured since Arthur passed, lay violently trampled. Ceramic shards of my lilies and lavender, usually vibrant, gleamed like broken teeth in the late afternoon sun across my drive. Then, the true horror revealed itself. In the exact center of what used to be my flawless lawn sat a stark mountain of my life. Clothes, cherished photo albums, even Arthur's old fishing rod, all piled carelessly, like trash ready for disposal. My knees buckled. I gripped the car door, knuckles white, a choked cry dying in my chest. No, this can't be happening. Not Mark. But a chilling certainty was already taking root. A crisp white note, taped bluntly to the front door, confirmed my darkest fears. Mark's confident handwriting, so familiar from his childhood essays, now delivered a brutal blow. "Mum, I'm sorry. Serena's parents are moving in with us. There's no room for you anymore. I hope you understand." My world violently tilted. Across the street, Mrs. Albright's gardening gloves pressed tight against her chest, her eyes wide with undisguised pity. The Miller kids, usually a whirlwind of noise, watched from their porch, unnervingly silent. Their gazes, sharp needles of curiosity and raw shame, pricked at my skin. I could feel the neighborhood's silent verdict, their questions hanging heavy in the humid air. My steps were leaden as I approached the door, knocking once, a whisper against the wood. No answer. My heart thudded like a frantic drum against my ribs. I pounded harder, the hollow sound echoing the vast emptiness expanding inside me. Finally, the door cracked open. Mark's face, pale and almost embarrassed, peeked through the narrow gap. He shifted his weight like a guilty boy, deliberately avoiding my gaze. "Mom, it's better this way," he mumbled, his voice flat, completely devoid of the warmth I remembered. Behind him, Serena appeared, arms crossed, a sneer twisting her lips. She looked at me, a stranger, like I was nothing more than an inconvenient stray. "You've had your time here," she stated, her words sharp, cutting through the thin air. "We need the space. My parents deserve comfort in their old age." My lips parted, but my throat felt sealed, constricted by a sudden, devastating realization. I tried, desperately, to recall the last time I'd ever asked them for anything. A favor, a bit of help. I couldn't. Every Sunday I cooked. Every sniffle I cared. Every school break, I gave up my own plans to babysit my grandson. Never a complaint, never a demand. Mark reached out then, not to comfort, but to push the door. It closed with a quiet click, a final echoing sound that reverberated inside my skull, sealing me out. I stood in the stifling June heat, sweat trickling down my spine, my trembling hands still clutching that note like a futile lifeline. One thought hammered in my mind, cold and brutal. They loved my house more than they ever loved me. And in that shattering instant, I knew. I was done. Not defeated, not broken, but profoundly, irrevocably done. Being alone, truly severed, suddenly felt liberating, a desperate escape from the slow, agonizing erosion of my self-worth. I drew a deep, shaky breath, blinked back the tears that threatened to spill, and walked to the pile. My old battered suitcase was there. I picked it up. One small bag. That was all I needed now. As I turned and walked away, every stare from the neighborhood felt like a physical blow. Yet beneath the pain, a dangerous, cold calm began to bloom in my chest. It was the chilling, irrefutable truth that even when you lose absolutely everything, a new, untamed strength can awaken, ready to rise from the ashes. Have you ever felt that unsettling calm when the deepest betrayal frees you from a life you never knew you were trapped in? The weight of the world settled with me on that cracked green bench at the edge of Riverside Park. My old suitcase, now my only tangible anchor, dug into my side. Birds chirped overhead, oblivious. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, painting dappled patterns on the concrete path where children ran past, their laughter bright and carefree. An old man tossed breadcrumbs to pigeons. A young couple argued quietly over a spilled coffee. The world kept moving, vibrant and uncaring, as if nothing had just ripped through my life. I sat there, invisible, watching it all. My hands, still smudged from retrieving my dirtied photo albums and Arthur's fishing rod from that awful pile, trembled slightly in my lap. These same hands, strong and calloused, had planted every hydrangea in that very yard, kneaded bread every Sunday morning, so Mark would wake to the comforting smell of home. I remembered those mornings, the quiet hush before dawn, when I'd slip into the garden with a cup of black tea, the dew wetting my slippers. I could almost hear my grandson's small feet pattering down the hallway, his sleepy voice calling, "Grandma, can I help you water the roses today?" A sharp pang went through me. He was the one bright spot, untainted by Serena's cold ambition, untouched by Mark's cowardly silence. I had given them everything. I gave up weekend trips with friends because Serena needed a break. I skipped retirement cruises because Mark's business was struggling, and I thought my savings could keep him afloat. I missed birthdays, reunions, all because someone needed me to stay behind and hold things together. And yet, today, they wouldn't even open the door. I pulled a crumpled tissue from my pocket, dabbed at the sweat on my forehead, pretending it was only sweat. An older woman walking by gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't stop. I didn't blame her. Who wants to get tangled in someone else's public humiliation? Ours blurred. The sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, then fading into the muted twilight. My thoughts felt like they were made of fog, floating and crashing into each other without logic. But somewhere in that haze, a chilling clarity began to form. I started replaying every conversation, every subtle glance, every carefully chosen word from Serena. I remembered her fake, saccharine tone whenever guests were around, the way she called me Mom, just loud enough for others to hear. But behind closed doors, it was always, "You really shouldn't let him eat so many sweets," or, "Your decorating style is so old-fashioned. We should modernize." The hints, the veiled threats, the insidious chipping away at my sense of belonging, they all came flooding back. God, the taxes here are killing us. She'd sigh, looking pointedly at the house. The small comments about downsizing when Mark lost a client at work. The jokes at dinner about how cozy it would be if her parents moved in someday. I remembered, with a sickening lurch, how she'd once looked me straight in the eye, her smile unsettlingly wide, and said, "You know, when we finally make this house ours, we'll turn your gardening shed into a guest spa." At the time, I'd forced a laugh, dismissing it as Serena just talking big. Now that memory felt like a blade, sliding, cold and precise, between my ribs and Mark, my own boy, the one who used to run to me after every scraped knee, who used to fall asleep on my lap with his breath warm against my neck. He had been slipping away for years, hadn't he? When Serena entered his life, he started coming to me less for advice and more for money. Each "thank you, Mum" became emptier, a formality checked off a list. I thought I was helping. I thought I was keeping the family together. But sitting there, replaying those moments, I realized they had been planning this slow exile for a long time. They didn't want me there anymore. They wanted the house, My house, the place where Arthur and I spent every anniversary cooking steaks out on the back patio, where my grandson had learned to ride a bike, where I planted my first rose bush the year we moved in. My lips curled into a bitter, humorless smile. What a complete fool I had been, believing that family loyalty, that unconditional love, was enough to keep me safe. A sharp ache spread across my chest. But this wasn't grief anymore. It was something else, something harder, sharper. A decision, cold and unyielding, began to crystallize in the fading light. A street lamp flickered to life nearby, illuminating the thin, etched lines on my hands. I had earned every single one of them, every wrinkle, every scar. I had been the backbone of that family for decades. I had been the one up at midnight when Mark was sick. I had been the one who never left, no matter what. And this was my reward. I folded the small, crumpled photo of my grandson carefully and slid it back into my purse. No more illusions, no more excuses for them. I pushed myself up slowly, feeling my knees protest, but I didn't mind. Each step I took away from that bench felt lighter than the last, imbued with a newfound, terrifying purpose. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew this with absolute certainty. They thought they'd won. They thought they had finally gotten rid of me. They had no idea that I was just getting started. Is there a moment when quiet despair transforms into a potent, unstoppable resolve, and everything you thought you knew about yourself shatters into a fierce new truth? The air in the tiny diner tasted of burnt coffee and old memories, a strange comfort in its shabbiness. I found a corner booth, the worn vinyl cool against my skin. My hands, still shaking slightly, wrapped around a chipped mug of tea I hadn't yet touched. Outside, the world pulsed with a rhythm I no longer understood. People hurried past, each carrying their own unseen burdens, living their own small, separate lives. I watched them, a ghost in plain sight. "Martha? Is that really you?" A voice, familiar and kind, cut through the din. I turned slowly, and there she stood, Janet, my old friend from the neighborhood committee. She held a paper bag, fragrant with cinnamon, her eyes wide with shock and something else, that unmistakable glint of pity. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked, sliding into the booth without waiting for an invitation. That small kindness, that single warm touch on my hand, was almost enough to shatter the carefully constructed calm inside me. I forced it back, a dam holding steady against a torrent. "They kicked you out, didn't they?" Her voice dropped to a hushed whisper, a dark secret shared between us. I stared, stunned. Janet leaned in, lowering her voice even more. "I wasn't going to say anything, but I overheard your daughter-in-law at the farmer's market a few weeks ago. She was telling someone they were planning to sell the house once you were out of the way." My stomach twisted, a sour, heavy knot forming in my chest. "I thought she was joking," Janet continued, her face a mixture of anger and sadness. "I mean, who does that to their own family?" But she seemed so matter-of-fact about it, like she'd already decided your future for you. My fingers tightened around the mug until my knuckles turned white. Janet squeezed my hand again. She said they were going to use the money to pay off her parents' debts and finally live comfortably. She even bragged about how easy it would be, since you were so trusting. I let out a long, shaky breath. The world tilted slightly, as if the floor beneath me was no longer solid. "They loved my money more than me," I whispered, the words tasting like acid on my tongue. For a moment, I saw Mark's face as a boy. Chubby cheeks, bright eyes, clutching my hand tightly whenever he got scared. I saw him standing proudly at graduation, hugging me so fiercely I thought my ribs might crack. Where did that boy go? I pressed my hand to my heart, trying to steady the storm inside me. My whole life, I'd believed love meant sacrifice, that if I just gave enough, they'd understand my worth. But sitting there, I realized love without respect isn't love at all. It's a transaction. Janet looked at me, tears welling in her own eyes. "What are you going to do now?" Her question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken sympathy. I lifted my chin slowly, my voice calm and certain, as though it was coming from some deep well inside me I'd long forgotten existed. "I'm going to get my life back," I said. Janet nodded, a slow, knowing gesture, wiping at her eyes. "Good. About time." I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt, feeling a strange strength bloom inside my ribs. I walked out of the diner, the scent of stale coffee clinging to my clothes. The long trek downtown past shops already dark for the night. My feet ached, my shoulders burned from carrying the suitcase, but each step felt purposeful, like I was pressing deeper into some hidden part of myself I'd long ignored. When I finally reached the arts district, I paused in front of a red brick building tucked between a gallery and a tiny flower shop. The sign above the door simply read, Studio 7. Years ago, before I gave up everything for family, I'd worked part-time as an art assistant at a community centre. The director, a kind woman named Eleanor, had always admired my dedication. So much so, she helped me secure a small studio apartment as part of a staff housing program. I'd held on to it, paid the minimum rent each year, kept it as my quiet escape. I almost forgot I even had the keys until that night, when my fingers found them, nestled deep in my purse. I unlocked the door, the click echoing in the stillness, and stepped inside. It smelled of old paint and dried flowers. The windows were dusty, the furniture sparse, just a small bed, a kitchenette, a worn armchair, but it felt like a sanctuary. I set my suitcase down and walked to the narrow window, peering out over the alley below. For the first time that day, I exhaled, without feeling like my lungs were full of glass shards. I kicked off my shoes, stretching my tired feet on the cool floor. In the dim light, I allowed myself to imagine. No screaming voices, no demands, no walking on eggshells to keep someone else's fragile ego intact. I closed my eyes and remembered Arthur's voice, a quiet whisper from the past. Quiet doesn't mean weak, Martha. Remember that. And that's when the plan began to form. Not a wild revenge, not a dramatic showdown in front of neighbours. No, something quieter, smarter. I would let them think they had won. I would let them believe I was defeated and small. Meanwhile, I would gather everything. My old tax records, property deeds, marriage certificates, every piece of paper that proved the house was still legally mine. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to an old contact. Richard, Arthur's best friend, now a retired lawyer. I hadn't called him in years. My finger hovered over the call button, my chest tight. Then I pressed it. His groggy voice answered after the second ring. "Martha, is everything all right?" A small, calm smile spread across my face. "Richard," I said softly, my voice steady for the first time all day. "I think I'm going to need your help. Can you meet me tomorrow?" He didn't ask questions. "Okay," he said. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the exhilarating, terrifying rush of stepping onto a path from which there was no return. When you hit rock bottom, do you find that your past suddenly offers hidden keys to a future you never imagined possible? The ancient kettle hissed to life. A small, defiant song in the quiet studio. I pushed myself up from the small table, my stiff joints protesting. But I didn't mind. Each movement felt deliberate, purposeful. I rested my hands on the chipped countertop, staring at the worn tiles, listening to the water begin to boil. Arthur's voice echoed in my mind, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "Don't sign away what's yours, not even to family. Love without respect isn't love at all." Back then, I'd thought he was being dramatic. I truly believed Mark would never betray me, that family bonds were stronger than greed. But as the steam rose, I understood every word. I thought about the day Arthur had convinced me to put the house deed partly in Mark's name for tax benefits and to secure his future. I remembered the gentle insistence, the promises that had felt like anchors, now felt like ropes they'd tried to wrap around my neck. I poured my tea, the warmth a comforting weight in my hands, and pulled out a battered notebook I'd salvaged. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but inside were Arthur's meticulous notes, property expenses, small maintenance logs, even old lawyer contacts. I ran my fingers over his handwriting. Each line felt like a quiet reassurance. You're not alone. You're not powerless. I knew taking them on wouldn't be easy. They had convinced themselves I was weak, that I would roll over rather than fight. But they didn't know what I had sacrificed to keep that house. The jobs I turned down, the friendships I let fade, the nights I stayed awake worrying about how to cover the mortgage when Arthur fell ill. They didn't know that house wasn't just wood and brick. It was my entire life's work. A calm, steady determination settled over me as I flipped through the pages, highlighting names and numbers. My fingers no longer trembled. I arrived at the downtown cafe early the next morning, my old brown coat buttoned tight despite the warming air. It was a small place, tucked behind a bookstore, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you knew to look. Inside, the scent of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me like a blanket. I chose a table by the window, ordering jasmine tea. Richard shuffled in a few minutes later, carrying his old leather briefcase. He looked older, a bit more stooped, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He spotted me, and a soft smile creased his face. "Martha," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look different, stronger." I let out a small, surprised laugh. "Maybe I am," I replied, the words feeling remarkably true. We sat in silence for a few minutes, a comfortable quiet that spoke of decades of shared history. When the waitress brought my tea and his coffee, I took a deep breath and pulled out my stack of documents. He listened patiently as I explained everything, how they threw me out, the note on the door, the piles of my life's memories on the lawn. His expression shifted from surprise to quiet fury. "They thought you wouldn't fight back," he murmured, tapping one of the deeds with his finger. "But these documents, the main title is still in your name. They can't sell anything without your signature." A warmth bloomed in my chest. Not relief exactly, but a first undeniable flicker of real power. "We'll file an immediate injunction to stop any transfer attempts," Richard continued, his voice low and steady. "After that, we can clarify your full ownership and serve them a legal notice. You'll be back in control." I nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Then he leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "But Martha, you need to be prepared. They're going to come at you harder when they realize you're not disappearing quietly." I swallowed, feeling the immense weight of his warning, but instead of fear, a cold, steady resolve settled in my gut. "Let them come," I said. "They've already taken everything they could from me. There's nothing left for them to break." We went through each page, marking important details. As he scribbled notes, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I barely recognized the woman staring back. The lines on my face and the grey streaks in my hair were still there. But behind my eyes, something new had ignited, something unshakable. I thought about the life they tried to take from me, the evenings tending my roses, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the halls, the echoes of laughter that used to fill those rooms. They didn't deserve it. After we finalized the paperwork plan, Richard patted my hand gently. "You're doing the right thing, Martha," he said. "It's time they learned you're not the woman they imagined." I squeezed his hand, feeling stronger than I had in years. As I stepped out of the cafe into the bright morning sun, a sudden surge of energy flowed through me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting. What do you do when the calm before the storm is inside you, fueling a resolve colder and sharper than any revenge? My studio felt like a quiet fortress as I folded the documents into a neat stack that night. The city hummed outside, a muffled symphony, a stark contrast to the silence I had finally reclaimed. Then, my phone buzzed. Mark's name flashed across the screen. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the answer button, a familiar pull of habit and a strange new resistance. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to guard the peace I had found. But I answered. "Mum," he said immediately, his voice tight, as though he were forcing concern into it. "Where are you? We've been worried." I almost laughed. Worried. After tossing me out onto the lawn like a broken chair, he dared to play the worried son. "I'm fine," I said, my tone flat, giving him nothing to latch onto. There was a beat of silence on the other end. I pictured him pacing, running a hand through his hair, just like he did when he was caught in a lie. "Listen," he continued, a hurried edge to his voice. "I think we all got a bit heated. We didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. Can we meet? Just to talk." A sour taste rose in my mouth, but I agreed. I wanted to see his eyes when he realized what he'd truly lost. We arranged to meet at a diner downtown, the same one where Janet had first given me the chilling truth. I arrived early, taking a booth by the window. The server set down a cup of tea, and I watched the steam curl, thinking of all the meals I'd cooked for him, the small hands I'd held when he cried as a boy. When he finally walked in, he looked more tired than I'd ever seen him. Serena was right behind him, her face sharp and alert, her eyes scanning the room. They slid into the booth across from me like two actors stepping onto a stage. "Mum?" Mark started, reaching across the table for my hand. I pulled it back, calmly folding it in my lap. His eyes flickered. "We wanted to apologize," he said quickly, rushing the words. "It was a misunderstanding, really. We just thought it would be easier if we—" "Easier for whom?" I cut in, my voice calm, but slicing right through his rehearsed script. He swallowed, glancing nervously at Serena. She took over immediately. A practiced move. "We're under a lot of stress, you know that," she said, her voice honeyed and thin. "My parents have nowhere to go." Her eyes, however, were cold, calculating. "And we thought, well, since you're so independent, maybe you wouldn't mind staying elsewhere for a while." I watched her closely, her carefully chosen words slipping around the truth like oil on water. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are some final property transfer papers," she said smoothly, sliding them across the table. "We thought maybe if you signed them now, it would clear everything up, and we could all move forward as a family." I looked at the envelope for a long moment, the pristine white paper mocking the chaos they'd created. My hands itched to tear it apart. Instead, I smiled faintly, pushing it gently back toward her. "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my voice even. Serena forced a laugh, though her eyes hardened at the edges. "Of course, we knew you'd be reasonable." Mark finally looked up at me then, truly looked. For a brief second, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just the shocking realization that he no longer knew the woman sitting across from him. I finished my tea slowly, savoring every sip, then rose before they could say more. As I walked out, I heard Serena hiss. "What did she mean? She'll think about it. She's supposed to sign today." I pushed open the diner door and stepped into the cool evening air, feeling a quiet surge of triumph rise through me. Let them scramble. Let them squirm. They thought they could buy my silence with one last signature, but I wasn't for sale anymore. Back at my studio, I set the unsigned documents on the table like a pile of rotting food. A deep, steady calm settled over me. I felt like I had stepped out of a fog. I walked into the kitchen, boiling water for tea, the tiny kettle whistling shrilly. I took down an old tin of jasmine leaves, letting them steep, inhaling the gentle floral scent. As I waited, I pulled out a worn photo album I had salvaged from the lawn. I flipped through each page. Arthur, holding a basket of fresh tomatoes. My grandson, holding a sparkler, eyes wide with joy. My hand hovered over their faces, and for the first time since that awful day, I didn't feel pain. I felt anchored. I understood then that I hadn't just lost a house. I had lost the illusion of family. They had taught me, finally and brutally, that love without respect is nothing but a cage. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Richard. My voice didn't shake. "Richard," I said, steady as stone. "I'd like to go over the papers again tomorrow. I'm ready to list the house for sale on my terms." There was a pause on the line before he answered, his voice tinged with cautious admiration. "You're sure?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "I've spent my life patching holes for people who never thanked me. This is mine. It's time I decide how the story ends." I hung up and set the phone down carefully, almost reverently. Then I went back to the table, took a pair of scissors, and sliced straight through the unsigned transfer documents. Each snip felt like cutting an invisible tether. When I finished, I swept the pieces into the trash, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and sat back down. In that small, quiet kitchen, surrounded by cracked tiles and dusty blinds, I felt more powerful than I ever had in that big house full of polished floors and staged smiles. What happens when the quiet resolve you've nurtured in silence finally finds its voice, and a piece of paper becomes a weapon in a war you didn't start, but will certainly finish? The morning light felt different, sharper, as I rose before the city. I gathered my purse and the old, worn folder holding my property documents, then set off for Richard's office downtown. The streets were quiet, just the first few commuters stirring. He greeted me with a tired but genuine smile, ushering me inside his office before the city fully woke. We spread the papers out on his big oak desk, the silence in the room heavy with unspoken determination. "We'll move quickly," he said, tapping the corner of the folder. "I have a trusted realtor friend who can list it discreetly. They won't know a thing until it's too late." I nodded, feeling each word settle deep into my bones. He began making calls right away, his voice low and steady. As he spoke, I sat in the leather chair by the window, looking down at the early morning commuters flooding the streets below. For so many years, I'd thought of those busy crowds as something separate from me, something I was too old, too invisible to belong to. But today, I felt more alive than all of them. When Richard finally hung up, he looked at me over his glasses. "It's done," he said softly, a hint of awe in his voice. "The house is officially listed. We've kept it under a private listing for now, to avoid alerting them, but offers will come fast. That house has value beyond their shallow imagination." I exhaled, my shoulders dropping for the first time in days, the tension I hadn't realized I was holding finally releasing. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching, thick with a gratitude that went beyond words. He shook his head, his eyes kind, but serious. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to see this through. But Martha, I'm proud of you." I pressed my lips together, feeling a warmth rise to my cheeks, a blush of quiet victory. After the paperwork was secured, I stopped by a small fabric shop on my walk home. I hadn't touched my sewing supplies in years, but something in me craved the steady, focused work of it. Back at the studio, I pulled out an old patchwork quilt I'd started decades ago. I unfolded it on the table, ran my fingers over the faded squares, and began stitching. The needle moved in and out, each stitch quiet and decisive, mirroring the moves I was making in my life now. By late afternoon, my small space felt alive again. Threads scattered across the table. Soft music played from a dusty old radio, and the faint scent of jasmine drifted from my teacup. I knew they would soon learn what I had done. I knew they would be furious, loud, pathetic in their panic. But in that room, surrounded by fabric and tea and my own steady breath, I felt untouchable. Being alone is not a punishment, I thought to myself. It's a gift they gave me when they showed me who they truly are. I finished another square, held it up to the fading light, and allowed a small, genuine smile to bloom across my face. They were still in my house, oblivious, living in a comfort they hadn't earned, but the clock was ticking, and soon their world would shatter. Have you ever felt the quiet, powerful satisfaction of knowing your enemies are entirely unaware of the silent storm you're brewing? The following week moved with a deliberate slowness, each day a stitch in my new life. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to meet someone else's needs. Each morning, I rose before the sun, wrapped myself in my old robe, and brewed a pot of tea. Then I sat by the window, my growing quilt on my lap, letting my hands move in steady rhythm as my mind wandered. It felt like I was sewing pieces of myself back together, repairing what had been torn, making it stronger. A few days later, I walked into Richard's office again, this time with my shoulders back and my chin lifted higher than it had been in years. He stood as I entered, a surprised smile forming on his face. "Martha," he said, scanning my face as if he barely recognized me. "You look lighter." I smiled softly, setting my bag down on the chair beside me. "That's because I finally put the weight down," I said. He nodded, a knowing gesture, and motioned for me to sit. We spread out the final batch of papers on his broad wooden desk. "These," he said, tapping the folder with a pen, "are the final sale documents. Once signed, the house will be officially sold. The money will be transferred directly to you." I looked at the papers for a long moment, running my fingers across the crisp edges. For a brief second, an image flashed in my mind. My grandson running barefoot across the kitchen tiles, Arthur humming while he chopped vegetables, Mark laughing in the backyard as a boy. But just as quickly as the warmth came, it was replaced by the sting of that note on the door. "Don't make a scene." I inhaled deeply and picked up the pen. My signature came out smooth, my hand steady, unwavering. When I finished, I set the pen down carefully. A strange rush of energy zipped through me, like I'd just stepped off a cliff and realized I could fly. Richard watched me with quiet respect. "It's official," he said. "The house is no longer theirs to touch or claim. You did it, Martha." I nodded slowly, a small smile flickering at the corners of my mouth. "I didn't just do it for me," I said, my voice low, firm. "I did it for every woman who was told to stay quiet, to sacrifice, to disappear." Richard's eyes softened, and he placed his hand over mine. "You're free now," he said. Those words rang in my mind like church bells. A week after signing the final papers, the knock came on their door. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of cold, steady drizzle that soaks into your bones, makes even the bravest people hurry indoors. But Mark and Serena had nowhere to hide. A court bailiff stood on the front porch, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. In his gloved hand, he held the official eviction notice. Mark opened the door first. From the sidewalk, where I stood partially obscured by a large oak, I could see his face pale instantly. His mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Serena appeared behind him a moment later, her face twisted in confusion and disbelief, still trying to grasp the reality unfolding before her. "Mr. and Mrs. Dalton?" the bailiff asked calmly, as if he were merely confirming a dinner reservation. They both nodded numbly, unable to speak. The bailiff unfolded the notice, the crisp paper rustling in the rain, and began to read in a clear, steady voice. "This residence has been legally sold. You are hereby required to vacate the premises within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in forced removal by court order." Serena let out a strangled noise, half scream, half choke. She reached for the doorframe as if it might hold her up. Behind them, through the open door, I could see the living room, my living room, the same walls where I once hung Arthur's old fishing hat, the fireplace where I taught my grandson to toast marshmallows on winter nights. I felt no sadness, only a quiet, resolute certainty. Neighbours began to gather under umbrellas, whispering, some filming with their phones. I saw Mrs. Albright standing across the street, her eyes wide as dinner plates, taking it all in. Mark finally found his voice. This must be a mistake," he sputtered, stepping forward, desperation creeping into his tone. "My mother would never—" The bailiff calmly handed him a thick envelope. All the legal documents are enclosed here. Ownership transfer, sale confirmation, eviction authorization. You may review them with your counsel if you choose. Mark's hands shook so violently the papers nearly fell into a puddle at his feet. I watched from the corner of the street, my umbrella resting lightly on my shoulder. The rain traced down my face, mixing with a single tear I didn't bother wiping away. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like the final cleansing, the last drop washing away decades of sacrifice that had turned into chains. Serena sank onto the doorstep, sobbing openly now, her face buried in her hands. Mark stood over her, stunned, silent, gripping the papers like a lifeline that was already slipping through his fingers. The bailiff turned, pinned the official notice to the front door, and nodded to the officers. They remained watchful but silent, enforcing the law I had put into motion. I stood a moment longer, breathing in the wet, heavy air. Then I turned and walked away, my steps steady, my spine straighter than it had felt in years. They thought they had buried me under shame and guilt, but I wasn't buried. I had been planted, and now I was finally in full bloom. When justice arrives, uninvited and undeniable, does it always bring a quiet, cleansing rain, washing away not just the past, but the very person you used to be? The city hummed a different tune for me now, a symphony of possibility. I didn't go straight home after the cafe. Instead, I walked, letting the crisp morning sun warm my face as I passed bookstores with their inviting scents, flower stalls bursting with colour, and bustling street corners alive with the hurried dance of strangers. My steps felt weightless, as if I were gliding just above the pavement, shedding years of burdens with each stride. Finally, I reached Richard's office. He looked up in surprise when I stepped inside. "Martha," he said, standing quickly, his brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right? I wasn't expecting you so soon after the—" I nodded, closing the door behind me with a soft click that resonated with finality. "I want to make one more change," I said, my voice steady, but edged with something fierce and final. The sound of my own conviction, so new, was almost startling. I sat down across from him, the well-worn leather of the chair creaking softly. From my handbag, I pulled out the thick folder containing all my financial documents, the ones Richard had helped me gather, the ones that mapped out every penny Arthur and I had saved, every investment we'd carefully cultivated over decades. I laid it on his desk. "I want to redirect all the remaining inheritance and the house proceeds," I said, watching his eyes for a flicker of understanding. "Set up a trust fund for elderly support programs, shelters for women in crisis, something that will actually help people who need it, not people who see me as a walking wallet." Richard stared at me, stunned. His jaw, usually so firm, went slack. Then, slowly, a proud, almost fatherly smile spread across his face, pushing the concern from his eyes. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "You're sure, Martha?" he asked softly, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze, my own unwavering. "Really looked at them today, Richard?" I said, the words quiet, heavy with unspoken truth. "They only loved my money. Now they won't have either." Richard nodded, his expression shifting into one of focused determination. He began drafting the paperwork immediately, his pen scratching rhythmically across legal pads. We spent the next hour going over every detail, every clause, ensuring it was airtight. Each time I signed a page, I felt a shackle fall away from my heart, a lightness spreading through my chest. When the last signature was done, Richard exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath the whole time. "It's done," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet triumph. "They'll receive a formal notice tonight. There's no contesting this. No loophole. It's entirely irrevocable." I stood up, gathering my handbag, feeling lighter than I had in decades. "Thank you, Richard," I said, my voice trembling then, the first crack in my armor. But it wasn't weakness. It was relief, pure and profound. He nodded, his eyes shining. You did something extraordinary today, Martha. I left the office as the sky turned gold, streaked with the first hints of sunset. That night, I imagined, they received the notice. A courier, unsmiling and efficient, would hand-deliver the envelope to their temporary motel room. Inside, they would find an official letter stating that every cent they had expected to inherit, every dollar from the house they coveted, had been redirected. No safety net, no easy landing. Just the echo of their own choices finally returned to them. I pictured them tearing through the pages, eyes wild, their voices rising in panic as the full, horrifying truth dawned. I imagined Mark throwing the papers across the room, his wife sinking to the floor, sobbing into her designer sleeves, their dreams of comfort and ease dissolving like smoke. The calls started that same night. I watched my phone light up again and again on the small kitchen counter, each time flashing his name. I didn't answer. Then came the messages. Desperate. Pleading. Mum, please, we need to talk. You can't just abandon us like this. We made mistakes, but we're family. I set the phone down and continued folding the patchwork quilt I had been working on, smoothing the corners carefully, each stitch a testament to my newfound peace. By morning, they were at my door. I heard the frantic pounding echo down the hallway, the muffled shouts through the thin studio walls. Mum, please open up. We can fix this. You can't just leave us out here like animals. Their voices trembled, not from love, but from sheer panic. The terror of losing comfort, of having to face a world that wouldn't bend for them anymore. I stood in the kitchen, breathing calmly. I didn't move. I didn't even glance at the door. After a while, the pounding turned to begging. My daughter-in-law's voice cracked, thin and desperate. Please, we'll do anything. We can't live like this. Think of your grandson. A sharp, bitter laugh almost escaped my lips, but I swallowed it back. They only miss me now that I said no. Eventually, their cries faded into exhausted sobs, then silence. I heard their footsteps retreat down the hallway. I imagined them shuffling back to their rented motel room, heads low, eyes darting away from every neighbor's glance, because the neighbors had started to talk. Word spread fast after the eviction notice. The same neighbors who used to wave politely from their driveways now whispered behind fences. I overheard Mrs. Albright at the corner store, her voice sharp and disbelieving. After everything she did for them, they left her out like an old rug and thought they'd get away with it. Another neighbor shook his head, adding, "You can't treat people like that and expect no consequences." The irony wasn't lost on me. All those years I spent shrinking myself to keep peace, bending to avoid embarrassment. And now, my silence was gone. My story was loud, echoing through every street in that neighborhood. They were alone now, truly alone. Later that day, I blocked both their numbers. I deleted the voicemails without listening. I closed every door they might try to slip back through, every window they might try to pry open. As I sat down with my cup of tea and unfolded my quilt again, I felt the final piece click into place inside me. I didn't hate them. That would still mean they held space in my heart. No, I felt nothing at all. A soft, clean emptiness that felt more peaceful than any false family dinner or forced holiday smile ever had. Outside, the city moved on, uncaring and alive, and for the first time, so did I. I spent the next few weeks turning my tiny studio into something that finally felt like mine, decorating it with a quiet joy. One afternoon, as I watered a small pot of herbs on my window ledge, I looked out at the city's glow and felt no pain of loss for that big suburban house, just the gentle, steady beat of a life fully, truly my own. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to how freedom blossoms when you finally choose yourself. Have you ever faced a moment where saying no was the most powerful yes you could give to your own life? Share your thoughts and stories below, because your voice matters. And if this resonated with you, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of quiet strength and unexpected